introduce our host today, Larry Pino, Dr. Lawrence Pino, actually. He works with us on a lot of our projects, and so we're really excited to have him today because he works with a lot of different investors, specifically setting up their trusts, and is very, very familiar with the investment world and helps us with any kinds of questions on our funds and syndications that we set up as well. So he's a great contact to have. And if you're looking for someone to help you establish your setup, legal entities, all of those things, definitely reach out to him. But with that, I'm going to let him take the floor because we have a lot to cover today, and I'm sure there will be a lot of questions. So put your questions in the chat below, and we'll open it up later on and answer as we go if we can. But thank you, Larry. Thanks for being here today.
Well, thank you very much. And can I be seen on screen right now, Deanna?
Yes, you can.
Okay, well, great. So hello, everybody. Glad to see you. Looking forward to doing this. And just thank you, Deanna, for the invitation, and Mike and Yuri to be able to speak to the Tempo group, to the Tempo team. So thanks for all of you. You know, the subject, to some extent, that I was asked to speak about is, first of all, from a legal standpoint, the integrated structure that I've kind of become relatively notorious for as far as investors go, but even more substantially than that, where it all came from, which is an interesting story, and I've talked about that a couple times. The first book that I had ever written was published. It was called Finding Your Niche, or Niche, as the case may be, which I published through Berkeley Publishing in 1988. I think it hit the stands in 1988. And it really addressed the issue of how do you go about sort of finding a business and finding a market to be able to attract and to target with that particular business. And, you know, I was traveling around the country, not only as a lawyer, but also as a lecturer. And I'd be stopping, you know, restaurants at night in whatever city I was in. And I just started taking some notes because I was attempting to get an understanding as to how I really ended up doing what I did. And I came up with this concept, which was called integrational processing. Integrational processing, I'm just going to make reference to it in just a little bit in the context of the actual conversation which we have, but integrational processing was really a recognition about the fact that everything we do in life really starts from inside. It doesn't start from looking at something on the outside. It starts from where you are internally. And so the concept of integrational processing was to create a methodology by which you could begin through introspection to get a better idea of who you are and what you want to become and what you want to do, and then extend that into a business from the standpoint of self-employment or investment or income production. And then eventually, even more specifically, to target that business in a particular way, which is integrated to who you are as a person. And I called that integrational processing. And the concept of integration, honestly, has always been very, very important to me, not only from the standpoint of business and markets, but also from the standpoint of maintaining an integrated life so that you have the opportunity to be able to live in an integrated way, not a disintegrated and a chaotic way, but where what you're doing personally is consistent with what you're doing professionally and what you're doing in your relationships and so forth. So in any event, I called this talk that I'm doing today Towards Living an Integrated Life. And I'm going to be speaking most of it on the legal side, but I want to just give you a couple slides, if you will, to kind of give the broader perspective on it. And then we'll drill down into legal integrated structure, which I suspect is really the primary reason I've been invited to speak with you, and certainly what you would be interested in here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and hope that I do this successfully. And Deanna, you tell me if I've done it successfully.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just talk a little bit about this concept of towards living an integrated life. And before I do, let me just give you I'm sure that some of you, because you've dealt with me in the Tempo universe, sort of, a little bit about me. But for those individuals who don't, let me go ahead and spend just a little bit of time. And I'm assuming, yes, you can see it. I'm just going to spend just a couple minutes or a minute just talking a little bit about my background, from an educational standpoint. I graduated from the University of Notre Dame with a bachelor's degree, then went to New York University, NYU Law School, got my JD degree there. And then a little bit later on, I ended up getting a doctorate in business administration from the University of Florida at the Warrington College of Business there. In between, I had, 3 certificates. One was from the University of Madrid, another from the Alliance Française, and another one from Dante Alighieri in Rome. So, I wish I could tell you that I spoke all 3 of those languages. I'm pretty fluent in Italian, not bad in Spanish. And, as much as I would love to have been fluent in French, that was a very long time ago. So I can't say that I am. From a professional standpoint, I've always really been lawyer, entrepreneur, and investor pretty much simultaneously. I started right away. I was never interested in getting a job anywhere. So I just immediately came back to Central Florida, which is where I'm from and where I live, which is where my family was, and right out of law school, and just started right into business. Matter of fact, I didn't start practicing until 1980. The first 4 years were actually spent in starting our very first business, which was a sporting goods store, which we built, we being my dad and myself, into a total of 9 sporting goods stores, which I ended up franchising and then eventually selling, along with what turned out to be the largest distributor of athletic equipment in the state to institutions like school boards, counties in the state of Florida, which I also ended up selling. And that really resulted in what turned out over my lifetime, 80 startups. They were all startup businesses that I've done in all kinds of different industries, and small businesses, but also large businesses. The last one before the current one I'm doing, which is Tuscan Gardens, was a business that I was, by the time that recession hit, was doing some $250 million a year in sales, and with 600 employees. So I've always run businesses. I've also always been an investor. I started off investing in single family like so many people. Matter of fact, I bought 18 single family homes and then realized, oh my God, I got 16 single family homes. At which point I sold the 18, it was actually 16 buildings, but 18 total units. And it was just like, no way. So I sold them, took back promissory notes, got involved in note investing, and did that for the next 20 years, along with stocks and options and so forth. So since that time, I've done, I don't know, a whole lot. I think this says, exceeding, $2 billion in value, maybe more, maybe about 2.5 billion by now. But I've transacted in all of those different types of asset classes, an awful lot of transactions. As a lawyer, I've always been a commercial lawyer. So as a commercial lawyer, I do business, securities, investment, representing business people, developers, syndicators, and lots of investors. And certainly anytime you have that type of client base, you have individuals who are interested in not only making money, but also in keeping and protecting the money that they make. And then, as I mentioned to you before, I traveled around the country for a lot of years. And this actually shows like 5,500 speaking engagements, speaking to over 1 million people for a 25-year period of time. I've authored 14 books and have taught in college for some time now. So in any event, that's my background. And I mentioned that only to kind of give you some breadth in terms of, most of my clients come from the perception that, having somebody who has done it, as well as advising on it, certainly gives them a heads up in terms of being able to handle things. So that's my background, and enough of that. The way that I want to just sort of start the subject and the discussion of integration and integrated life is with this particular quote: "Wherever you go, there you are." And I've used that fairly often because the one thing that we know for sure is that no matter what happens, whatever is going to happen, you're always going to be at the center of it. You have individuals who come to you and they say, "Well, my God, this and this and this." And I say, well, you do realize that there's a common element here. The common element of every one of those travesties that has occurred, is that you're the one that's at the center of it. So you may want to be thinking about that, which kind of goes back into the concept of, I don't know if this works. Yeah. Into just simply recognizing this concept of integration and how integration plays out in our lives. Let me put that a little closer. The first way, as I indicated to you before, is in this concept of integrational processing between your personal commitments and how you show up in life. So you're not looking to the outside, you're looking to yourself and to how you want to be, how you want to show up, and how you are in fact showing up in life. Secondly, you provide for allowing yourself, once you understand that, for some rules of engagement for how you operate in your personal, parental, marital, professional domains, because they're all parts and extensions of who you are. And so from that capacity, you sort of want to identify, well, what are those rules of engagement? When I have a client, for example, what we talk about first of all is strategics. So strategically, how do you want to show up? How do you want your business to be? How do you want it? How do you want people to perceive your business to be? And once you have strategically evaluated that, then you say, okay, so why don't we create some rules of engagement so that in the different domains in which you're going to be operating, each one of those points in that particular direction of that particular strategy. The third thing is you then provide for functional processing for the protocols that you're going to routinize and optimize in life. So a functional processing is a process by which you create the rules of engagement, but those rules of engagement have particular protocols attached to them. I don't want to be terribly personal here, but just as an example, I kind of make a decision. I made a decision. I was single for a long time, and primarily because I was traveling around the country. But on a personal level, when I finally married, when I was 41, by the way, and I finally married, I just sort of you make this decision, and you say, I'm married. I now want to make sure functionally I sort of want to do those things which are going to be supportive of not only a continuation of the marriage, but also a really joyful marriage in the process. And one of those protocols that came out of that sort of thought process was a protocol of giving my wife a note every morning. We always worked together. Matter of fact, I had hired her before I even thought about dating her, let alone marrying her. And so it's very easy to do, but I give her a note every single morning. And it's just one of those protocols that, I wouldn't think that anybody thinks about it as a protocol, but it is a particular behavior that you make a decision about when you realize what those things are that you want to make sure that you routinize in your life in those different domains. And then you structure an architecture that's going to encapsulate your purpose, your commitment, your intention, and your mission. So for example, on a personal basis, without telling you what mine are, would be going way too far on this particular discussion. I have a purpose in life. My purpose is to, I have a commitment in life. My commitment is to, my intention in life is to do the following, and my mission in life is to do the following. And I have those not only because they become part of my life, integrated into my life, but also it's because it's at that juncture that I, every single day, as I go through my, some people may call it prayers, some people might call it, alignment in the morning, whatever it is, I remind myself about what that purpose, commitment, intention, and mission are every single day. So all of those manifest themselves in a particular structure, if you will, or architecture. Now, in our case, the only thing we're going to talk about today is not 1 through 4, because this would be a much longer webinar if we even thought about doing that. But we are going to just simply focus on pathway number 5, which was the pathway being of what we just discussed. And that is to take yourself on a personal and family basis, look at it operationally, cover the investment objectives, and then cover the business and professional objective. And then you're going to create an architecture that structures that for you so that they all tie together. And what you now have is the foundation for the integrated structure, which is what we're going to be talking about from a legal standpoint. The architectural structure has 5 major goals in mind. It's to provide for full asset protection. It provides for complete estate planning. It provides for tax optimization. And by the way, tax optimization is not the same thing as tax reduction. It's just to make sure that you have optimized whatever the appropriate structure is so that you can then apply strategies to be able to reduce your taxes. And then number 4, a goal of consolidating your personal, professional, and financial objectives into one architectural structure. So you don't have a whole bunch of stuff all over the place, what I call dangling participles of life. And number 5, the elimination of friction while you begin the process of simplifying the various processes that are in your life. The result of this is that in a business or professional standpoint, from the standpoint of all of your investments, and on a personal standpoint, all of these things become incredibly integrated together so that you don't have anything on the outside that creates that friction. I remember when I started to begin doing this, which would have been about maybe 25 years ago, for my clients. Client came to me and said, listen, I know a client who I was doing real estate transactions for, and he says, do you know anything about estate planning? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, I know enough about estate planning and asset protection. What are you looking for? And he says, well, I just need to I need to try to figure out how to get some clarity on this thing. He says, can I send you the financial statement, my personal financial statement? I was doing business stuff for him, and review it. And I said, of course. And I saw it, and it was a jumbled mess. He had investments over here that were owned by a trust, and he had investments over here that were owned personally. He had companies that had businesses in them, and it was everywhere. And there is no question, not only was it not integrated, but it was a jumbled mess, which would have forced him to have probate. And on top of that, exposed him to external liability. And that began the process of putting together an integrated structure whereby all those things fit under one roof. So let's take a look at that for purposes of this webinar. And ordinarily, by the way, we're going to have questions at the end, but ordinarily I would pretty stop now and say, does anybody have any questions on that? But let me just continue on, and we can deal with questions later on. The fundamental structure of the integrated structure, it starts off with one company that's going to be a holding company and another company that's going to manage that holding company. Now, that's the very beginning of it. So for individuals who are starting, and they may be just simply starting their investment activity, I can take that holdings company, and I'm going to show you what I'll do with it in just a second, but that one holding company can own all of your investments. You have all of your investments in that one holding company, and that one holding company is managed by a management corporation that I'll be talking about in just a little bit. Now, that's just what I call the fundamental structure of it, but it starts to become a little bit more interesting as we continue to grow in our professional and investment lives. So for example, what I now do is I say, okay, let me take that one structure, you see it, it's the holding company on the one side and the management corporation on the other. And then why don't I have that holding company own 3 subsidiaries? One for real estate, one for investments, and then one for business enterprises. So those are now 3 subsidiaries, assuming that your action is involved in all 3 of those areas. One real estate, one non-real estate investments, and one in enterprise. You don't even have to start with all 3 of those. You're starting with the holding company number 1. When your investments get large enough, if you will, or varied enough, that you say, okay, I think it's time. So then you form an investment company underneath it, which is owned by your holding company. Let's say you're investing in real estate. Well, then let's go ahead and have a real estate subsidiary owned by your holding company. And then, of course, if you have businesses, you can create a business subsidiary, or what I call an enterprise company, which is owned by your holding company. So the basic structure, what we just talked about, of just the holding company and just the management corp, becomes now just a little bit more complete, if you will, when you have operating subsidiaries in those 3 categories. Tempo, for example, and the different Tempo investments that you might be involved in would be owned by the investment company. So you invest through an investment company, which is formed as an LLC, and that LLC is owned by your holding company. And we'll take a look at what that looks like in just a second. Okay, so very fundamental, very easy, and then it begins to become more mature as your investment activity becomes more mature. Let's drill down just a little bit more and take a look at what that now means. So supposing on the upper left-hand side of this slide, you have your holding company. The holding company is formed, it doesn't really matter, I'm forming it in Florida because I'm in Florida. So it's a Florida limited liability company. I form it with a manager, which now you know is going to be the management corporation to its right, or to its left, to my right. Then as the members, take a look at what those members are. They're the tenants by the entireties, or if you will, the marital trust, that is the husband and wife, or father, mother, if you will. There's also going to be an irrevocable trust for the father, an irrevocable trust for, it's also going to be irrevocable trusts for each of the kids, and it's going to be an irrevocable family trust in that particular case. So you have irrevocable trusts. You could also have revocable trusts based upon your objective, but it's at the holding company level, which is really what I want you to understand. It's at the holding company level that it's owned by your entire estate, your entire legacy. So all of that is in the holding company, so that your holding company becomes the wealth accreting vehicle for you. Now, when I say wealth accreting vehicle, why is it the holding company? Because the holding company owns the subsidiaries. So anything you buy or invest in with a subsidiary automatically accretes wealth creation to the holding company. So holding company owns the real estate company. Holding company owns the investment company. Holding company owns the enterprise company if you have businesses. And in that context, your legacy, yourself, your spouse, your kids' irrevocable trusts own the wealth building entity, which is the holding company that ultimately is going to survive you, as it just simply operates as an LLC, and LLCs don't die. LLCs don't pass away. So it becomes constant accretion of value. By the way, one last comment on that. Most people, the way they operate is they create asset wealth over here, and then when they pass away, it gets transferred. That's the silliest thing I've ever heard. Why not just transfer the opportunity for wealth creation in the very beginning into either the subsidiary or into the holding company, and then let it build wealth inside so that there is no transfer, there is no probate. It all happens inside the same holding company itself. And I'm saying the same thing in different ways just to make sure that you're getting it, but it becomes a significant shift in the thought process of wealth creation. Wealth creation occurs inside the structure, not outside that structure. Therefore, there's nothing to tax from that standpoint, from a probate point of view. So looked at a different way, you see that you have the holding company on the left-hand side of that slide, and it is run by the management corp, and it owns the real estate, investment, and the obedience training of, in this case, the enterprise company. All right, so that's the basic structure of the integrated structure. Now, I'm going to add one particular element that has an additional dimension, a little bit of complexity, but not much, and we'll make sure that we clear that up. By the way, an SPV is a single purpose vehicle, or some people call it SPE, which is a single purpose entity. What do I mean by that? You can own real estate inside that real estate holding company. You can also own real estate by having another LLC, which is a single purpose vehicle or single purpose entity. Why would that be the case? Well, if it's nothing other than just single family homes, you could have a single purpose vehicle that you're going to use for all of the single family homes that you have. On the other hand, if you have a 36 unit apartment building, you probably want one single purpose vehicle for just that one apartment building. So you have your real estate subsidiary owned by the holding company, but you then have 121 Main Street Apartments as a single purpose entity or vehicle underneath that real estate subsidiary of the holding company. All of it, nonetheless, accretes wealth to the holding company throughout this entire process. All right, let's talk a little bit more about one additional element that I've added on to this one. Same structure, holding company. You have the the real estate, you have investments, you have enterprise, but you notice that there's one additional element there, which is talking dog qualified holdings. So what is qualified holdings? So I've seen, and over the years, that individuals will use a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA, and they buy investment assets with those IRAs and with those Roths. And I know that, obviously, because we do the work we do with Tempo and other funds and syndicators and so forth, that you do the same thing. Many of you do the same thing. That's one way that you can, in fact, use qualified funds. I have a different way to do it. And the different way is by having an LLC, and that LLC is structured as part of the integrated structure here. And so it is to form an LLC, number one. It has to be managed by a disinterested third party, number two, and it's owned by your traditional IRA, your Roth IRA, your spouse's Roth IRA, and so forth and so on. And that particular one would give you the opportunity to, in essence, have one company of qualified funds that takes care of all of your assets together that are qualified assets, all of your retirement accounts. How does that work? So if you have your qualified holdings, that was that third one on the top there, and you have it owning your investments. So IRA number one, you see where the arrow points. It takes the asset and it transfers it to the holding company. So the IRA is now not going to own the asset anymore. It's going to be transferred to qualified holdings company. And in exchange, qualified holdings is going to transfer membership interest in qualified holdings to that particular IRA. You do that with every single one of your IRAs, your spouse's IRAs, and so forth. All the assets get transferred into qualified holdings, and qualified holdings ends up issuing membership units to every single one of your retirement accounts, so that your retirement accounts own the company, but the company owns a whole bunch of different assets, syndications, apartment buildings, whatever it might be. Well, why is that an advantage? Because now you can operate that whole qualified holdings company as a separate LLC. So rent from one property goes into qualified holdings. Distributions from a syndication goes into qualified holdings. It all goes into qualified holdings bank account. Well, why is that valuable? Because now you're now going to use the value, the bank account, to invest in other assets directly. So that now that qualified holdings company is actually buying assets itself based upon the distributions that it's earning, based on the income that it's earning, and so forth. All of your assets are all consolidated into one entity, as opposed to having to be separated based on different IRAs and limited by how much is in the bank account of each one of those particular IRAs. Okay, so that's the use of a qualified holdings company as part of the integrated structure. Okay, before I move on and talk about some other things, this is the fundamental structure which we talk about, and it could be as complex or as simple as you want it to be, starting from just a holding company and the management corp to the holding company that has subsidiaries and the management corp running them all, to qualified holdings company taking care of all of your qualified investments, and your investments that are not qualified owned by the real estate subsidiary and the investment subsidiary. Okay. Now let's talk about the rest of the items. Aside from that, which handles all of your business, real estate, and investment activity, you also have other things like, for example, a personal residence. We typically put that in a marital trust. Everybody says, but isn't that the same as tenants by the entireties? No, it's not. Primarily because anything that's in a trust does not have to be probated. So if it's tenants by the entirety, when one spouse dies, the other one, of course, automatically inherits. On the other hand, if they both were to die in a common accident, for example, that asset would have to be probated. Easy way to handle that. You just put the personal residence in a marital trust. And no, does it provide any type of, do I lose homestead? No, you don't lose homestead exemption. Personal residence, marital trust. Same thing with a personal operating bank or brokerage account. That can be one of two things. It can be owned by the marital trust, so that again, there's no probate. But if it's not owned by a marital trust, then what you would do is you would provide a transfer on death provision, so that on a transfer on death, that also doesn't have to be probated. And I think you get the commonality here. There's no reason that you have to probate anything. Everything should be integrated into your structure. You shouldn't have anything outside the structure. Anything outside the structure will have to be probated. And why would you even want to bother to do that? Longevity occurs when what you fundamentally do is you have the center of a castle, and inside that castle is where your family lives. You build the castle around it. You build a moat around that, and everything is inside, including all the villagers. They're all inside the castle. There's nothing outside the castle. No assets are outside the castle. No income production is outside the castle. Everything is inside. And that holds true here too. So whether it's a personal operating bank account or it's a brokerage account, it's a marital trust. Life insurance policies, marital trust. Other insurance policies, marital trust. This way, the marital trust provides spouse, husband, wife, and at that point, were they both to pass away, whoever the beneficiary is going to be is the beneficiary of a trust, and a trust does not have to be probated. And then even the family vacation home. If you have a family vacation home, it either becomes a marital trust or as part of the integrated structure for the holding company, if you have a family trust, as I do, for example, the family trust would own the vacation home, the vacation home for the family. Okay, so these are just typical things that you deal with. So let me go back to it again. Oh, by the way, before the summary, let me address one last thing, and then we'll go to the summary. I want you to see one particular thing here that I'm going to show you. In the real estate subsidiary, in the investment subsidiary, and in the business subsidiary, you notice that there are two members, not one. One of those members is the holding company, Talking Dog LLC, but the other one, which owns 99%, but the other one is the management corp, which owns 1%. That 99 and 1 is used for asset protection purposes, because in an LLC, a single purpose LLC is seen as the same as the grantor inside an LLC. So as a result of that, a creditor can attack anything that's inside the LLC if it's owned 100%. So that LLC shield doesn't have a shield against outside creditor. It can go directly into and attach the assets of the LLC. When you have two or more 99 and 1, the holding company and the management corp, you now have an asset protection vehicle that can never be penetrated. Why? What can a creditor do? They have to sit on the outside. They can't penetrate inside with what's known as a charging lien. The only thing that they can do is they can grab something that has been distributed outside the LLC by the LLC itself. But of course, if there's a charging lien sitting there, you're not going to do that. You know better than to do that. So you have lots of other ways that you pay bills, you pay salaries, you pay all kinds of things, but you don't distribute outside of that LLC as long as there's a charging lien sitting there. So it is an asset protection vehicle. So I say that to you. And by the way, any SPVs underneath those, you don't use the 99 and 1, you just take 100%. This way you don't have to file a separate tax return for any of those, and they just simply become entities which are not required to file tax returns. Okay, let me go back to here. So let me just simply summarize this, and shortly, Deanna, I'll be glad to take any questions that are up and running, or any questions that you have too, Deanna. So we talked about the goals. It was asset protection. Why is there asset protection here? Because everything is inside the castle. There's a moat around the castle. So there are no assets that are outside the castle that anybody can get. There's complete estate planning. Why? Because the holding company is owned by your estate plan. It's owned by your revocable trusts. It's owned by your irrevocable trusts. It's owned by the parents. It's owned by any other vehicles that you want to use for estate planning purposes. Why is there tax optimization? Because everything flows through to the 1040 of the grantors. So you don't have taxes being charged at different numbers and different methodologies with respect to the entities. everything is a flow through, and it flows all the way through to the 1040. So you're now going to optimize your tax treatment because you now see where it lies, which is at the 1040 level. So that's where you're going to put your tax planning in order to be able to reduce your taxes. Number four, it consolidates all of your objectives into one structure. Notice that whether you're dealing with business, investment, real estate, or personal, it's all there and it's all integrated into your structure, which allows you then to what I call simplify the processes to eliminate friction. You know that you have an asset that you're going to buy. Is it real estate or non-real estate? Well, it's non-real estate. You know which entity you're going to use to buy it. And the only other question you have to ask yourself is, do I buy it by that with that subsidiary, or do I form another single purpose entity to buy that particular asset because it needs its own entity structure, as opposed to simply buying it through the subsidiary itself? So it achieves all of those goals elegantly and efficiently, and you stay integrated as a human being in the process of doing that. So final, I think you've seen this before. No matter where you go, there you are, and you become the one all the time. So with that said, I'll leave this up in case there are any questions on that, but otherwise I'm just going to open it for questions, Deanna.
Okay, so one question is, when the individual qualified investment is placed in qualified LLC, does the LLC issue shares of ownership to the individual qualified investment holder?
Yes, not to the holder, but to the account. So it's a self-directed IRA account to begin with. So, and I know that many of your investors, have accounts at Quest. So I'm just going to use Quest, not to pitch Quest, just as an example. So you have a self-directed account at Quest. So it's whatever, John Smith, John Smith, account number 12345. That one account has assets that consist of 100 units in one of the tempo funds, and certain amount of money in the bank. So it transfers that 100 unit, it transfers the tempo membership units into qualified holdings. And that would be a simple assignment that you would be signing off on at your office. And qualified holdings would then issue a certificate to John Smith's account number 12345, for the benefit of through Quest as a self-directed administrator. So it's in the name of the account. The membership unit is in the name of the account, and qualified holdings has the actual investment in tempo.
Yeah, that was confusing for me when your office first approached me about one of these. I didn't understand, but I understand now when you're explaining this. It makes sense to pool everything together so you can make more investments instead of having to do multiple investments to reach that one minimum. So basically, a lot of people ask me, can I split it between 2 or 3 of my IRAs and 401ks? And yeah, it's possible, but I mean, what you're describing is so much easier. So that makes sense to me.
Yeah. What has happened over time, typically this becomes just, pretty much the last thing that any of our clients does, primarily because they've got capital to deploy. And it's very personal. It's personal assets they've bought and all that. So we create the structure. And then once the structure is created, we do what we call the migration process. We have a spreadsheet of all of the different types of investments that they have, and we list them out. We list how these investments are held now. We list where they're going to be migrated to, and we list what the instrument is that's going to migrate. So for example, let's say they're invested in real estate. Well, we would just we say it's going to go from here to the PropCo, to the property or to the real estate subsidiary. And how am I going to do that? We're going to create a quitclaim deed to do that. So here's where it is, here's where it's going, here's the instrument to use. Promissory note. It's in the name, it's in their personal names. Where do you want to put it? In their investment account, in their investment company. So it goes from their personal to the investment company. How are we going to do that? With an assignment of the promissory note. And if it's secured by real estate, assignment of the mortgage deed. So we now have the instrument over there. And in your case, when you have a syndication, or in your case, a fund, in some of them funds, so what you do is you have the membership unit. That membership unit is owned by, in this case, their IRA account. It's going to go to the holdings company, qualified holdings company. And how does that occur? Through an assignment of the membership unit, which is signed off by the manager of the fund or the syndication, right? So you migrate all of those things. Typically, what we do is we migrate all the assets, and the only assets we haven't migrated yet are those that are held by the self-directed administrator. And then we talk about the qualified holdings at that time, because now that we've got everything else handled, that's the last thing to get handled into it. In some cases, particularly for some of your clients, you end up with substantial amount that are in qualified funds. And so they oftentimes want to start off at that level with the qualified because they've got, millions invested with through self-directed accounts.
Well, good to know. I guess, are there any other benefits other than simplifying and pooling?
One benefit, of course, is that it doesn't require you to have to go through the self-directed administrator.
Right.
And that depends on, to a large extent, and I'm going to stop sharing at this point. Does that work now?
Yep.
It stopped? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So, sometimes depends on the self-directed administrator, but sometimes it's like a pain in the neck to get them to sign off on documents. It could take weeks to get documents signed off on, and investment transactions don't need to do that. They should be handled, efficiently. So that's an advantage. Once it's transferred, it's a pain, by the way, to get it all transferred for that very reason, because you have to go through the self-directed administrator to do it. But once the transfer has occurred, fantastic, because then that's all you're dealing with is the disinterested third party, which is somebody that you've appointed anyway. So whether it's our law firm or it's your CPA or financial advisor or anything like that, it gives you the opportunity to just simply get it done very quickly from that point on.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next question. And you might have to share slides again for some of these questions, just FYI.
Okay. No, I'll be glad to.
Well, not yet. I'm just saying.
Okay.
You might. If personal residence is in a trust, does it become a paperwork hassle to prove who has authority to act on behalf of the trust? When, for example, getting a mortgage, setting up insurance and utility accounts?
No, I've never found that. With personal residence, you just have a certificate of trust. Any trust has a certificate, and it's one page, and it just identifies, who the parties are that are to that trust, and the powers of the trustee is a second page that you would typically, attach to it. But it's not. It's not a hassle.
Someone asked about on the integrated structure slide, what is the Talking Dog LLC? I noticed that as well. It's holding 99% as a member, and the three, not the holdings company, but the investments, real estate, and if you know what I'm talking about.
Actually, I'm trying to find you. I'm trying to find.
On the slide with the black squares.
Yeah, no, are you seeing anything yet or not?
No.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out. How do I now get back to my slide?
If you share screen,
Yeah, but I don't, yeah, but I have to figure out though.
there were a lot of questions submitted before the webinar as well, so I will get to a few of those. I had a LLC I formed, and it makes me wonder if I change the use of it, if I could change the members and make a better use for that LLC. I know that's possible. It's just kind of a question if I would need to do that, I guess, at this point.
Yes, here's what I'm trying to do is find, oh, there's the share. Okay. It was being buried here. So, okay, okay, so here's screen one. And here's the share. Okay, great. So now at least I know what I'm doing here. Okay, so I'm seeing that you're,
Going back to the talking dog slide.
yes, let me do this. All right, so go back to talking dog slide. Which one? This one?
Yes.
Okay. All right, now ask me whatever that question was.
Yeah, so they were wondering what talking dog is 99% holder for like real estate investments and the obedience training LLCs. Because we don't see the Talking Dog LLC on here. Is that like a special purpose
Oh,
entity?
I'm sorry. You know what? You're exactly right. No, consider Talking Dog Holdings on the top
Okay.
as being the same thing as Talking Dog. That was just, I should have just taken, this is an old slide, so I should have just taken the holdings out of there. So consider that Talking Dog Holdings is in fact the same, this Talking Dog Holdings right here is the same thing as Talking Dog
Okay.
LLC down here.
Okay. So that actually answers the question that I had for my personal LLC. I don't have to have the name holdings in it. It can just stay as is, and it
Yes.
could be owner or members of these other LLCs.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, in many cases, they're not. I think the purpose for holdings here was just simply to indicate that it's a holding company. But many times, one of the questions that we will ask, we have about half a dozen questions that we ask as part of this. We ask for the naming convention.
Okay.
And the naming convention, this is all talking dog, but the naming convention is anything. There are travelers who use different names of islands, and there are skiers who have different ski slopes that they ski, and all kinds of different ones. There's one that has Scottish heritage, and so uses all of these strange Scottish names from medieval history and so forth and so on. So yeah, the word holdings doesn't have to be there. Qualified holdings doesn't have to be there. It's just a name.
Awesome. Good to explain, because I have heard you want to kind of give it a random name too, not just like put what it is on there, because somebody
Yeah,
could randomly sue you for something if
yeah,
they're
yeah,
looking
yeah.
for
Precisely,
someone. Yeah.
precisely.
Okay. So um follow up to that qualified holdings slide.
Mhm.
Uh does the qualified holdings LLC account set up in Quest using this example?
Does the qualified holdings?
Set up in Quest. So I think
No, the LLC is set up under state law.
right. Yeah, it's separate from your IRA company. It is nothing owned
Correct.
by them. They don't set it up.
That's
So,
right. Yeah. So if we're, for example, Quest, we would not even contact Quest until we have a holdings company, a qualified holdings company set up, and then we would and we understand what the particular client owns through the self-directed account, all of the different account numbers, right? And we would then fill out that paperwork with Quest to transfer those assets to this qualified holdings company in exchange for the membership interests. And we do all of that stuff. We take care of all that.
Can you commingle the type of qualified assets with qualified LLC, or do the account types remain separated?
When you talk about commingling, what we don't do is the qualified holdings company is owned only by qualified accounts. So there would be traditional IRAs, they would be Roth IRAs, they would be HSAs, they would be different types of qualified accounts that would be owned, that would own the qualified holdings company. We don't want to commingle with non-qualified owners, because then you have the potential of what would be called a prohibited transaction.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So going through some other questions. If personal residence is in a trust, does it protect it from being found as an asset? For example, if I'm the target of a frivolous lawsuit?
No, it's not. The purpose of the marital trust is strictly to avoid probate. It doesn't provide any asset protection value. On the other hand, by virtue of the fact that the trustee, the grantors, and the beneficiaries are all the same, and that's tenants by the entirety. It's a homestead, and it's protected almost in virtually every state. It's protected at some level as a homestead.
Does it have to be, if you're homestead, does it have to be in a specific kind of trust? I'm not married, so I wouldn't have a marital trust. But where I'm going with this is, can I keep my homestead exemption in irrevocable trust or in in a revocable trust? And does it matter what kind of trust to keep that homestead exemption?
Yeah, yes, it does. It would be a revocable trust, a revocable trust. You would not want to ever hold a personal residence in an irrevocable trust. That will lose you the homestead exemption.
I've seen people do it for certain purposes. So that they wanted to not own any assets or have access to it to give themselves access to different benefits as they're aging. So I've seen it, but it's complicated. Does the management entity LLC-C, so I think this is corporation, maybe they're confused, have to be in the same state where one physically lives or works?
No, but the question of the state that you're going to use kind of depends to some extent on the individual and what kind of investment activity that they're doing. So, for example, if I'm operating a business in, just picking Arkansas, but I live in Florida. So I create a Florida corporation, but it's doing business in Arkansas. Well, I'm going to have to take the Florida corporation and register it in Arkansas anyway as a foreign corporation. So now I have two filings that I need to do, two annual fees, and so forth. So it's two tax returns. Although Florida doesn't have a corporate tax, you still have to file the tax return. So if you're operating in Arkansas, you might as well form the company in Arkansas. And the same holds true to some extent with real estate, unless you have a property manager, in which case, technically what you could do and what we have done is you take the best state that you want to take for whatever it is, whether it's Delaware or in many cases we use Florida. Sometimes we use Nevada, but it's usually Delaware and Florida, and that might own the asset. And if it's an asset owned outside of Florida, we would probably use Delaware. And the asset might be owned by that company if the property manager is collecting the rent as a property manager in a different state, so that it's the property manager that's actually providing the reporting of that particular company in that state. So I guess maybe the short answer, Deanna, is that I think that it would just depend upon the circumstances of the individual. There are some states that there's like nothing you can do about, like California. There's nothing you can do about California. You breathe in California, you're going to be taxed in California.
Yeah, the second question to that was, why is your overall holding company in Florida as opposed to Wyoming or Nevada, where is there similar asset protection or favorable?
No, this was just simply done from a Florida standpoint. We usually, asset protection is asset protection. So this structure is what produces the asset protection, whether it's in Florida or Nevada or anywhere else. The only reason that a holding company would be used that is outside of whatever the state is, most reasons why, is if they want total anonymity. And to get total anonymity, Delaware is total anonymity. And it's the one that's total anonymity, regardless of whether you use a corporation or you use an LLC. Total anonymity does not occur in most states that individuals think provide anonymity, primarily because if you have a corporate manager, then they can identify the corporate manager upon renewal. And if anonymity is really important to you in other states. So if anonymity is really important to you, there are really only two states that you can use for that, which would be Wyoming and Delaware. The reason we default in favor of Delaware is because there are lots of good reasons external to asset protection to use Delaware. For example, lots of companies, lots of funds, lots of syndications, lots of major corporations, they're all in Delaware. So when somebody has a Delaware company, there's not the natural inclination of somebody to say, they're doing it for asset protection, because there are lots of other reasons why. If somebody's got a Nevada corporation and they're not living in Nevada, the implication is they're doing it for asset protection. If somebody has a Wyoming corporation and they're not living in Wyoming, chances are they're doing it for asset protection. So I think in language, it's called a tell. There's a tell where you've now told somebody that there's something to look after. There's something to go after. So we tend to default in favor of Delaware for total anonymity because there's no reason not to.
Just makes me wonder if all these celebrities are moving to Wyoming for that reason, so it doesn't tell. Anyway, let's get a couple more questions here before we wrap it up. There are multiple percentage owners in a holding company, revocable and irrevocable. Example, kids irrevocable is 40% and the parents revocable is 60%. As you build up money in the holding company and want to take a distribution, do you have to pay out your kids each time?
No, it's great. These are all defective trusts. These are these are created as intentionally defective trusts. So the grantor of the trust is in charge of all the trusts, number one. And number two, how those distributions occur are done by the manager. And the manager is the corporation, which is controlled by the parents. So no, the distributions are not going to be the distributions in the way that you think about them as going to members. The additional comment that I would also make is that all taxation is at the 1040 level. So as it passes up to the parents as the grantors of the trust.
I hope that was clear for them. If the idea is to pass your assets to your kids when you die, but not when you're living, should you avoid the irrevocable trust?
No, not at all, because what you're doing, none of that is going to matter until such time as you die. I mean, as a practical matter, nothing matters. It's being done because what you want to have happen is your wealth builds through time, and the value, remember, the holding company doesn't own assets. The holding company owns the membership unit in limited liability companies that own the assets. So as a result of that, the only thing that happens inside the holding company on the top is just strictly just its balance sheet gets larger over time. And when you were to pass away, to the extent that you then pass away, the only thing that is going to end up passing through this particular trust structure is going to be through the trust you use, which has a beneficial interest that's going to be going to probably the family trust at that point. Otherwise, all the rest of them are now going to be, the percentage of wealth is going to be owned by the rest of the members of that particular trust. So there's nothing, there's nothing, this corporation doesn't die. This limited liability company doesn't die. So there's no reason that that anybody would be doing anything with it until that time occurs. The additional component to it is if you are close to, because wealth comes in varieties. You're starting off when you're starting off, and 30 years later, you might be at $50 million. So at a point in which you are going to start talking about, exemptions. So for example, you have a gift tax exemption, which is the same as the estate tax exemption. And so let's talk in terms of $13–14 million for that exemption. As you get closer to that, while these things can start off as revocable trusts, and they certainly can for the kids, start off as revocable trusts, the way that you shift so that you take advantage of that gift tax exemption is to make them irrevocable. So when you make it irrevocable, you file a gift tax return. You don't pay any tax on it, but you file the gift tax return because you have a lifetime gift tax exemption. And now that's been transferred out of your estate, so that as you continue to build your estate, that estate continues to grow, right? Inside rather than inside your estate. So you can start with revocable and then make it irrevocable. The reason that in some cases we start as irrevocable is, number one, it gives our client the opportunity to take advantage of the gift tax exclusion. But also number two, it's because kids make mistakes, and as they become young adults. And so you kind of want to protect them from the mistakes that they made. Like, for example, probably a bad marriage, probably doing stupid things that subjected them to liability. An irrevocable trust, anything that's in that irrevocable trust is protected. So you could use that same irrevocable trust. I have, for example, not only do I have this structure for myself, obviously, but for my kids, I also have, stock brokerage accounts for them that are in their irrevocable trust. So that, and I started those when they were kids. And so now that they're young adults, they have access to that irrevocable trust, which they get to keep in that irrevocable trust as long as they want, and it stays 100% protected since they are the beneficiaries of that trust.
I'm going to have to talk to you more after this, so I hope you have a slide with your contact information. But we have a few more questions. If all entities are pass-through entities, does the limitation on state and local tax deductions create an issue? And how can the state and local tax deduction be increased or avoided?
Well, any state component of this is going to be a derivative of the 1040. So the 1040 obviously is the federal tax return. So once that 1040 has been solidified, the tax derivative of that on the state level is going to come from the 1040. And every state that has an income tax is different in the sense that some deductions on the federal level don't represent a deduction at the state level. Other deductions occur at the state level that aren't on the federal level. So, but the point of departure, though, is the federal tax return. So nothing in this structure alters that. All these things end up going up to and get maximized, optimized as it filters through this process, particularly because the management corporation is a C Corp. So you're going to optimize the ordinary necessary business deductions through the utilization of the management corp. So you maximize that. It reduces the balance of the taxes that are coming out that cannot be otherwise deducted. You therefore optimize the flow to the 1040, and then you apply your tax strategies, tax mitigation strategies to the 1040 side of it, which has a derivative effect on the state level.
Okay. Do you have, so you have 14 books, and which one would you recommend for personal integration or financial integration? Do you have any books that go over this?
The only one that's available, I think, it's in PDF at this point because the book went out of print a long time ago. But finding your niche, believe it or not, you can actually find old copies of it that somebody will like sell on eBay or something of that nature, right? So yeah, so potentially that, or honestly, Deanna, anybody who wants it, just let me know and I'll send you the PDF copy of Finding Your Niche that you could send them. I
Yeah,
don't
that would be
have,
great.
yeah, I'll be glad to do that offline with you. I don't have a book on the topic of living an integrated life. Although I will tell you, I have been pondering what my next book is going to be. And I really do think it is living an integrated life is the subject that I think would be worthwhile. It's taken me decades to kind of figure out how it works. But I think after decades, I can probably make a book out of it.
You know, I have so many questions that we didn't even get to answer. Like, what are the tax advantages of using trusts? And if there are any benefits to having a trust in California, um, things like that. I mean, if you need some ideas for your book, just come to me because I've got a bunch of them.
That
Um,
sounds great. That sounds great.
but yeah, there's definitely benefits that we have not covered. And I think that is definitely a personal situation that you would have to go over with a CPA or an attorney to figure out what your situation is, to figure out what those benefits are.
And that's, by the way, that's very typical, Deanna. So we inevitably work with, besides we're working with our client, make sure that they're very clear about this, and we kind of go through the process. But once we understand, we do an individual PowerPoint presentation similar to Talking Dog for each client. That's our point of departure. And then we begin the process of building it once we've agreed to what that thing should look like, right? And then at that point, and as we built it, we then get their CPA involved to make sure that the CPA understands what we're doing. They also understand the prior tax history, and so forth and so on.
Yeah, so you do teach your clients how to put the assets in there and how to accrete wealth, and you have some way of for them to, to know going forward how to use this vehicle the
Oh
correct
gosh, yeah.
way.
Yeah. I have a whole, I even have a webinar called using the integrated structure. So primarily because there were so many questions. And along the way, they also, besides the fact that we either do it for them or we show them how to do it in terms of migration, some clients do it themselves. Most of the clients have us do it for them, just primarily because it'd be more efficient to just have us do it. But then in terms of how to go forward with it, when we deliver all of their state documents to them, all of the documents in the workflow, which are like 2 pages on the workflow. We also have a letter, which is I think like 9 pages long, that asks, that addresses all of these types of questions. And we provide that along with using the integrated structure PowerPoint.
Well, that's really helpful because I
Not
know
PowerPoint, I'm sorry,
that's
recording.
that's
Webinar.
really helpful. Yeah, because I know some people that have trouble using their vehicles after they're set up, and that's something that is super helpful going forward because this
Oh,
is
yeah. We have we have lots of clients that we have brought on that oh, there you go. We have
yeah.
lots of clients that we have brought on that they created trusts years ago and they've never used them because they have no idea how to use them.
By the way, this is Larry's website. So if you would like to contact him, here is his information. It's pinolowgroup.com. He's located in Winter Park, Florida. This is his telephone number. And if you want to consult with him and see what's going on with your situation and what you should do, go ahead and fill out this contact form, and somebody from his firm will reach out to you and set up a time to talk in more detail.
Or if you want, by the way, besides that contact form, can you just put that back up?
Oh, yeah.
Kathy Simmons, whom you know, Deanna, that 407-425-7831. I've had that telephone number since 1980.
Oh, wow.
And Kathy Simmons has been with me since 1981.
Wow.
So yeah, you could just call that number and Kathy Simmons will either answer it or return your phone call. And she'll be glad to just schedule a time to talk to me.
Well, that just tells you that Larry is a great guy to have an employee that long. Wow. Well,
Yes,
thank you
indeed.
so much for doing this for us, Larry. I really appreciate it and look forward to getting this PDF. I'll actually send it out to everybody who registered. We had a lot of people register for this webinar, so I know it was very valuable. And I got a lot out of it too. So I'm looking forward to talking to you more about this later on about my own
That
situation.
sounds great. So thanks very much, Deanna, for having me, and my best to all of you. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.